Story 1. Robin Williams. He was everywhere when I was growing up. I remember watching Mork and Mindy as a kid, and of course all of his movies and voice roles over the years. I was saddened by his passing, especially given the circumstances surrounding it. Story 2. Richard Simmons recently died. That man was such an amazing and kind human. He just began writing and interacting with fans on Facebook after a couple of decades living a private life. Story 3. Norm Macdonald. I didn't even know he was sick. Edit. I know no one knew he was sick. This is a reference to his joke about not being aware of who Hitler was, deciding we needed to kill him. Then upon being told Hitler died years ago, Norm said, "I didn't even know he was sick." What a legend. Keep sharing your jokes and memories. Story 4. Probably Chadwick Boseman. As a loyal Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, I know he would have been a key player in the franchise post-Endgame. Plus, from what I hear, he wanted to make T'Challa, who was very serious most of the time, have a bit more fun, similar to the version he played in What If? Story 5. Davy Jones. I wasn't a huge Monkees fan, but I still liked them a lot. My favorite was Mike. One day, I heard Davy was doing a book signing at my local mall, so I thought I'd give it a shot. I was able to meet him and tell him I had lived in England for about 2 years. We proceeded to converse about England for about 5 minutes. It felt like I was talking to a regular person, not just a star. It hit me harder than I thought it would when I heard of his passing a few years later. Be a daydream believer. Story 6. Literally no one is going to understand, but film critic Roger Ebert's death. I know it may seem odd, but every Friday when I went into work, the first thing I would do was read his reviews for the films released that week. This was my tradition for years. Through them, I learned so much about what to get out of a film. Not the technical snooty stuff, but the joy of movies, the value of art, the power of film to help us empathize with others. His reviews were well written, sometimes funny, sometimes deep, and sometimes vicious. His reviews also always gave you a glimpse into his values and his life. Then he started a personal blog, which I read as well. Then he was diagnosed with cancer. When the cancer returned, he lost his lower jaw, his ability to eat, and his speech. But the reviews and the blog kept coming, taking on deeper topics, understandably about life and death, making the most of living, and what it was like knowing you didn't have much time left. Through the horrible ordeals, he remained steadfastly optimistic through physical therapy and using a computer to give him some measure of speech again. He remained deeply devoted to his love of film. It was a brave and transparent window into his life. I specifically remember one post about whether his views on life after death had changed now that he was so near death. He was agnostic. He said something along the lines of, "I was perfectly content and unbothered before I was born, and I expect I will be the same after dying." When he died, it wasn't like a celebrity that I just wouldn't see in movies every once in a while. The reviews, the blog, it just stopped cold, except for one last one he wrote to be published upon death. So I felt the loss in my daily routine, and, silly as it sounds, it was a little like losing someone I had gotten to know a bit. He was a good guy. Story 7. Chadwick Boseman's death was rough for me. I am white, but I am also a cancer survivor, so hearing that he died was tough for me. I was younger at the time, and I had cancer when I was really young, going 17 years out of treatment as of this year. It was unreal how someone so important in Marvel history had died of a similar disease that I had. I wasn't much of a fan of the Black Panther movie at the time. I rewatched it last year and absolutely love it now. What his role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe meant, along with learning later that he visited children in hospitals while he was sick himself, made me really rethink my life. I decided that I must live my life to the fullest potential I possibly can. After rewatching the first Black Panther movie and watching the second, it makes me wonder what those movies would have been like if he were still alive. With the second movie, it hits so hard when you can tell that both cinematically and in real life how much they mourn him, as well as seeing that they had written so much of the movie to have him be the focus, but had to shift gears later in production due to his passing. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Story 8. Gene Wilder. I know it was close to his time, but just the way he went was magical. He really held onto his passion until the day he died. A true master of his craft. I'll never forget how much I cried learning about his passing. He was everyone I aspired to become: quick-witted, dedicated, honorable, loyal, gifted, passionate, smart, and a true leader. Story 9. Anton Yelchin. The fact that his life seemingly was against the odds. The only child of his parents who fled from Russia due to oppression, he had cystic fibrosis. And yet he beat the odds and became such a respected actor, only to die in a freak accident with his Jeep, which had only just been recalled for the same presumed issue that caused his untimely death. His parents, especially his mother, are known to visit the grave frequently, if not daily, to mourn their only child. Story 10. I was a kid when Amy Winehouse died. I was devastated because whenever I turned the radio on, Rehab was playing. Now that I'm older, I realize how young she died and how sad the circumstances of it were. Story 11. He was the first musician that I discovered on my own, not handed down to me from my older brother. I was 13 when his first album was released and remember thinking that the line, "Well, she was an American girl, raised on promises," was an amazing opening for a song. It hints at and points to such a broad yet specific story. I became a lifelong fan. I saw him in the 1980s, the 1990s, and on his last tour. On top of all the amazingly great music he gave us, he was a genuinely good man and gone too soon. Story 12. George Carlin. I understood some of the unpleasant things about the world way earlier than I should have. I always appreciated his perspective on things. The man was funny, but what really stuck with me was how direct he was about calling out the falsehoods people maintain to keep the illusion that everything is fine. I often wonder what he would have to say about the world today. I also really miss Robin Williams. He was such an abundant man, and the knowledge of the circumstances of his death breaks my heart when I think about it. In a way, even his loss put some good into the world, though. It really highlighted the idea that people who are struggling with depression don't always appear depressed. Having struggled in that area myself, it strongly reminded me that the people in my life would feel great pain at losing me too. Story 13. I watched Jeopardy from a small girl with my grandparents, then on my own. He was like family, only he was the smart one. He was witty and full of kindness. I was so sad to see him suffer through pancreatic cancer treatments, but a testament to his sure willpower to persist, dying only 10 days after taping his last episodes. What a loss for all. Story 14. Corey Haim. We are the same age, and I loved him in The Lost Boys. I always hoped he would get better. George Michael. I am an 80s kid, and his music was a huge part of my life. And Prince, because he was Prince. Story 15. There's a lot that probably hit harder. But I'm going to go with Cameron Boyce, so young and had his full life ahead of him. Plus, I was growing up watching him on Jesse and Grown Ups, among others. Knowing someone around my age was gone at the age of 20 is terrifying. Story 16. John Lennon. 40 years old. So young. Senseless is what makes it so tragic. He was feeling great, at peace with his past, seemingly, and had just released a new album. I do believe the Beatles would have gotten together to do some things, even if just a tour or two to celebrate their music. But even if they didn't, he would have had so much life left to live and enjoy for himself and his family. Story 17. Robin Williams. Nothing was a bigger gut punch than knowing the man who played so many happy roles was so devastated that he took his own life. Not that I blame him. He believed he had Parkinson's and opted out of that torturous decline. I wish all people suffering degenerative and terminal diseases were given the opportunity to avoid suffering to death. And then finding out he was misdiagnosed was even worse, though I can't imagine living with any form of dementia is a great existence. Story 18. Prince and Eddie Van Halen. They were directly responsible for me ever picking up a guitar. I heard their beautiful, crazy sounds and knew I wanted to make my own. Story 19. Patrick Swayze. My all-time favorite movie is Dirty Dancing, and his death, especially seeing how it all went, was heartbreaking for me. He always seemed like a lovely guy, and the fact he was gorgeous was just the icing on the cake. Story 20. Chris Cornell. As I was growing up, almost every time I mowed the lawn, I would listen to Soundgarden. When he died, I realized that the soundtrack of my youth was gone. Hurt really bad. No one sings like you anymore. Story 21. Robin Williams hit the hardest because I absolutely adored that man. The only one that's ever come close since was Cameron Boyce, and that was more because of how young he was and the way he died. Story 22, Gord Downey. You knew it was inevitable, but still, to quote William Saroyan, everybody has got to die, but I have always believed an exception would be made in my case. I was hoping that Gord would be the exception. Story 23, David Bowie. He was not that old, and his cancer was not public knowledge, so it was very unexpected. Also, I just never imagined a world without Bowie, and it is very bleak. Story 24. She went through so much because of Prince Charles. She was involved in so much. AIDS, landmines, charities, homelessness, changing the royal family's image, and a lot more. Story 25, Jimmy Carter. He was on a list I kept track of last year. He was the 55th famous person to die last year. It was a rough one, and I'm happy he got to 100 beforehand. Story 26, Eddie Guerrero. His tribute episode of WWE Raw or SmackDown, I can't remember which one, was the most heart-wrenching thing I witnessed as a teen. There is no other wrestler that to this day gets loud chants anytime someone does a call out to him. Story 27, Bowie. When I read the news, I said, "No!" In such a sad voice it brought two people from the other room to check on me. He had a very important impact on my life. I grew up as a weird kid in a small rural town. The radio stations played mostly country and western, but Bowie was mainstream enough for a few of his biggest hits to get played sometimes. I liked them and started looking into him. It was an epiphany moment. You can just be that weird? How come nobody told me? It was a very important part of my journey to stop trying to be normal. Story 28. Robin Williams' Hook has always been one of my comfort films, so my heart breaks a little watching it, especially now that Dame Maggie Smith has also passed. She reminds me of my Nana who passed 2 years ago, so it hurts a little more. Also, Rick Mayall and Alan Rickman. Story 29. Depending on how you look at it, some people don't have sympathy for his situation. But I personally think this guy had some of the best raw talent for hip-hop and general music. He was finally coming into his own and was insanely popular even without hitting his peak yet. Unfortunately, the drug and alcohol scene got the best of him. Story 30. Having lost so many friends to suicide, he just added on. It felt personal, as he helped shape my love for music and art. My childhood wasn't pleasant, to say the least, but his music made sure I knew I wasn't alone. Unlike most, I have never seen suicide as selfish but as desperate. Please don't do it. I don't blame you for wanting it to end, but there's always a better way. Story 31. For me, the Rev Jimmy, from Avenged Sevenfold. They have been my favorite band since I was about 13. He passed a little before I turned 15. I remember getting out of the shower, ironically putting on the only Avenged Sevenfold shirt I owned at the time, then checking my MySpace. I had a comment from a friend telling me the news. Then the album Nightmare came out, and that song Fiction. Man, knowing they were all sincere buddies before a band just made it really sad to me. I don't know why. I have seen them live 6 times so far and was not fortunate enough to see them live with Jimmy, the Rev. Story 32, John Denver. I was super young when he died, so a lot of my appreciation for him came afterward, but I know that if he were alive, he would still be making great music and making a difference in the world. Story 33, Karen Carpenter. I really enjoyed her songs from the 1970s and was shocked when she passed away in her prime from anorexia nervosa. Later, I found out she had a miserable life and marriage, which likely hastened her passing. Story 34. George Carlin, critical thought-provoking comedy that led people to discover honest truth and retrospection. The world needs him now more than ever. It's a big club and you are not in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. George Carlin. Carl Sagan. His poetic beauty and inspiration as a whole were truly magical. He was an astronomer and planetary scientist who could relate astrophysics to a teen with a dynamic philosophy lesson mixed in. We have also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster. We might get away with it for a while, but sooner or later this combustible mixture of ignorance and power is going to blow up in our faces. Carl Sagan. Bob Ross, seriously, he was a master of teaching humility through making mistakes and creating self-empowerment for generations. He is probably responsible for getting many artists into painting with his meditative ways. There are no mistakes, just happy accidents. Bob Ross. Steve Irwin. I cannot think of many people who have had a bigger impact on animal rights, conservation, and awareness. He showed us animals are our friends, and much can be learned alongside them. The anti-tiger king. Crocodiles are easy. They try to kill and eat you. People are harder. Sometimes they pretend to be your friend first. Steve Irwin. Many more that could be added, but definitely none of the vapid entertainment types that most seem to idolize. Story 35. The death of Christina Grimmie affected me deeply, and I wasn't even a serious fan. I had heard about her and listened to a couple of her songs, but the way she died was just absolutely tragic, and it stays with me to this day.